It was never supposed to be this way. Mia Williams stared at the mansion in front of her, the towering gates looming like a fortress, far from the quiet life she had imagined. She had always dreamed of escaping her small town, building a future of her own, away from the shadows of her family's debts. But life had other plans. A phone call had shattered everything she thought she knew. "Get to the mansion. We'll take care of everything. It's the only way." Her uncle's voice echoed in her head, cold and indifferent. And now here she was, standing at the edge of a world she didn't belong to, about to marry a man who had power and control over everything she held dear. Victor Leone. The name alone struck fear into anyone who heard it. A notorious Sicilian Mafia boss with a reputation for being ruthless, a man whose name was spoken in hushed tones. She had never met him, but she had heard the stories of a man who controlled everything in his empire, including the lives of those he deemed expendable. Her heart raced as she stepped forward, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the stone courtyard. The grand mansion, with its ornate windows and towering spires, felt cold and unwelcoming. It was a place of power, a place where emotions were buried under layers of control. She had no choice. The debts her family had accumulated were too large to ignore, and the only way out was this marriage, this arrangement that felt more like a business transaction than a bond between two people. As the door opened, she was greeted by a group of men in dark suits, their eyes scanning her like they had seen it all before. The man who stepped forward, his presence commanding the room, was Victor Leone himself. His eyes met hers, cold and calculating, and in that moment, Mia felt a chill run down her spine. This was no fairy tale. This was a nightmare disguised as a new beginning. And yet, despite the fear clawing at her chest, there was something else, something she couldn't quite place. A tension in the air, a pull she couldn't resist. But for now, she had no choice but to walk into this world and face the man who held her future in his hands. Mia stepped into the grand hall, the marble floors gleaming under the soft lighting. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to steady her breath. She had no idea what to expect from Victor Leone, but the coldness in his eyes when he first looked at her told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't a man who believed in love. He was a man who believed in control and power, and she was nothing but a pawn in his game. "Come in." His deep voice echoed through the room, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked up to see him sitting behind a massive wooden desk, his posture commanding, his expression unreadable. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a cold, calculating look that made her skin crawl. "Sit." He gestured to the chair across from him. Mia hesitated for a moment, then walked toward the chair, her steps measured, her mind racing. As she sat down, she could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. Victor leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "You know why you're here," he said, his voice low, almost casual. "But do you understand the consequences of this marriage?" Mia swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. She nodded slowly, though part of her still couldn't believe this was happening. Her life had just taken a turn into a world she never wanted to be a part of, and there was no going back. She could feel the power shift in the room, as though everything was suddenly out of her hands. All she could do now was play the role she was given, and hope she didn't lose herself in the process. Mia sat there, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to steady the trembling in her fingers. Victor was silent for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. She could feel the weight of his stare, the pressure of his silent evaluation, and for a brief second, she wondered what he was thinking. Did he see her as a tool to be used, or was there more to this marriage than he had let on? She wanted to speak, to break the silence, but the words didn't come. She was trapped in a world she didn't belong to, and the reality of it was sinking in. "You're not what I expected." Victor's voice finally broke the stillness. His words were calm, but there was a sharp edge to them. Mia looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. "I've dealt with many women before," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But none of them had the same innocence as you." Mia's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what he meant by that, but the way he said it made her uneasy. "I'm not here because I want to be," Mia said quickly, her voice more firm than she felt. "I'm here because I have no choice." Victor's lips curled into a slight smile, but there was no warmth in it. I know, he replied, his voice low. But that doesn't mean things can't work out. In time. His words lingered in the air, and Mia couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. She had no idea what he meant by that, but the uncertainty of it made her even more nervous. For the first time, she began to wonder what her life with Victor Leone would really be like. Would she ever escape this world he had drawn her into, or was she already too far gone to turn back? Mia walked through the vast, quiet halls of Victor's mansion, her footsteps echoing off the cold stone floors. She had never been in a place like this before. The walls were lined with expensive paintings. The chandeliers hanging overhead cast a soft glow, but despite the luxury, there was something about the place that made her feel like an outsider. The house felt more like a prison than a home. She paused at a window, looking out at the sprawling estate. The manicured lawn stretched as far as the eye could see, but there was no warmth, no life in the scene. It was all too perfect, too controlled. You'll get used to it. Victor's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. This is your life now, he continued, his tone as cold as ever. Mia tried to ignore the lump in her throat. This wasn't her life. She was just here because her family needed her to be. She didn't belong in this world, and the longer she stayed, the more she felt herself slipping away. I don't want this, Mia said, her voice barely a whisper. You don't have a choice, Victor replied, his eyes cold but not unkind. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. But it's not as bad as you think. You'll see. Mia didn't respond, but inside, she was already making plans. She didn't know how or when, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to stay here forever. She would find a way out. But for now, she had to play the role she had been given. And so, she walked away, her heart heavy with the uncertainty of what was to come. Mia couldn't sleep. The bed in her room was massive, luxurious even, but the silence of the mansion was suffocating. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. The night had passed quietly, but the reality of her situation was sinking in deeper than ever. Victor had made it clear that there was no way out. This was her life now. The thought felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. She missed her old life. She missed the simplicity of her old routine, the quiet moments in her small apartment, and the freedom she once had. But those days were gone now. Mia turned on her side, pulling the covers closer around her. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. It reminded her of the storm inside her, of the confusion, the fear, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness. She didn't belong here. This life wasn't hers, and yet, it was the one she had to face. At least for now. The door to her room creaked open, and Mia sat up quickly, heart racing. But it wasn't Victor. It was one of the servants, a woman who brought her a tray of food. Mr. Leone's orders, she said, setting it on the table. He wants you to join him for breakfast in the dining room. Mia nodded, though her stomach churned. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face him yet. She wasn't sure if she ever would be. But there was no avoiding it. She had to keep up the facade, at least for now. She had to survive in this world, even if it meant losing herself along the way. Mia stepped into the dining room, her heart pounding in her chest. The mansion felt even more imposing in the morning light, its grandeur overwhelming. The long dining table stretched out before her, polished to a shine. She could see Victor already seated at the head of the table, his posture impeccable, his expression unreadable. He looked every bit the part of the powerful Mafia boss that he was. As she walked closer, he didn't look up, his gaze focused on the newspaper in front of him. Mia hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. She had never felt more out of place in her life. Sit, Victor said, his voice low, not bothering to glance up. She followed his command, slowly lowering herself into the seat across from him. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Mia could feel the weight of his presence, like a storm waiting to break. The sound of silverware clinking against plates was the only noise filling the space. How are you adjusting? Victor's voice finally broke the silence, but his tone was so detached, so distant, that Mia wasn't sure if he even cared about the answer. I'm managing, she said, keeping her voice steady. Good, he replied, still not looking at her. You'll get used to it. Mia didn't respond. She wasn't sure she ever would. The reality of her life now was something she was still trying to accept. But as she sat there across from him, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Victor Leon than she had first thought. Something in his words, in his eyes, made her wonder if he saw her as more than just a pawn in his game. Or perhaps it was just wishful thinking. Mia spent the rest of the day wandering the mansion, her thoughts a swirl of confusion and uncertainty. She had tried to find a way to adjust to this life, but the longer she stayed, the more she felt like she was losing herself. The walls of the house, though beautiful and imposing, felt like they were closing in on her. The heavy silence that hung in the air only made things worse. When evening came, Mia found herself standing in front of the mirror in her room, staring at her reflection. The woman she saw wasn't the same one who had entered the mansion just a few days ago. She looked different now. Her eyes were more guarded, her expression more resigned. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning to see Victor standing in the doorway. He was dressed casually, his usual stern expression softened just a bit. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and steady. Mia nodded, though she had no idea what he wanted to talk about. She had already given up any illusion of control over her life here. As he stepped into the room, the door closing softly behind him, she could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about the marriage anymore. It was about everything that had led them to this point, and everything that was still to come. "I know you don't want to be here," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "But I need you to understand something." Mia held her breath, wondering what he was going to say next. "I didn't bring you here just to control you. There's more to this than you think." Mia listened carefully, trying to grasp the weight of Victor's words. His gaze softened, just slightly, but it was enough to make her heart race. "I know it must be hard for you," he continued, his voice calm, yet with an undertone of something deeper, something that felt almost personal. "But I didn't want you to be part of this world just because of a family debt." His words hung in the air, and Mia's mind raced. This wasn't what she had expected. It felt like a crack in the cold wall he had built around himself. "Then why?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why bring me here? Why force this marriage?" Victor exhaled slowly, standing tall and looking away for a moment as if gathering his thoughts. "It's complicated," he said, his eyes returning to hers. "And it's not just about me or you. There are things in this world that go beyond personal choice." Mia's confusion deepened, but she stayed quiet, letting him continue. "I've made decisions for the family, for the empire. You may not understand now, but in time, you will." The weight of his words pressed against her chest, and though she tried to remain composed, part of her couldn't help but wonder, what was he really saying? Was there more to this marriage than just the debt, than just being a pawn? For a brief moment, she thought she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, something raw that he quickly masked. But it was gone as soon as it had appeared, leaving her with more questions than answers. Mia stood in the dimly lit hallway, her mind still spinning from Victor's words. She had hoped for clarity, for some sense of control over her life, but all she had gotten was more confusion. She had always been the one to take charge, to carve her own path, but now she was trapped in a world where she didn't understand the rules. The empire, the family, the choices he spoke of, they all seemed so far beyond her reach, and yet she was stuck in the middle of it, forced to navigate a life she hadn't chosen. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to see Victor walking toward her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them thick with unspoken tension. "You need to understand, Mia," Victor said, his voice steady but with a hint of something deeper beneath the surface. "This isn't just about what happens between us. This is about a world that demands certain things, and I'm not the one who made the rules." His words, though calm, felt like a warning. Mia swallowed, trying to keep her composure. "So, I'm just a pawn in your game?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Victor's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "It's not that simple, and you know it." She couldn't help but feel the weight of his words pressing down on her chest, but she refused to let him see how much they affected her. "We'll see," Mia said quietly, turning away from him. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to just accept her fate. She would fight, even if it meant playing a game she didn't understand.